Black empowerment has taken the stage in a big way leading up to the 2020 presidential election because this is not going to be an event, it's going to be a process. And of course, the issue that has become paramount and emblematic of the entire Black empowerment political struggle happens to be reparations because it's been effectively used by the new voices of Black media in order to help separate the real from the phony. As we've seen, though, the white media is not about to sit on its hands and allow Black folks to assert themselves. They understand that they've got to get out in front of this story as quickly as possible. So just a couple of days ago, you had one of the worst white media outlets on the planet, USA Today, who decided that they were going to try to insinuate themselves into the issue of Black folks in American slavery, and they decided that they would use a Black slave in order to do it. Now, look at this article here. Right off the bat, we got a big problem. This entire so-called article is based on a research paper written by a white woman in England. Some woman named Hannah Durkin. Yeah, I never heard of her either. They don't show her face, naturally, but she's simple enough to find online, and what a surprise, yeah, she's white all right. This is her bio page from Newcastle University's website. You look at it and what you see is her PhD has nothing to do with Africa, but that's okay because it seems like her memberships do. And it seems as if this woman has been set up by the white media, particularly its academic arm, for the sake of being the official mouthpiece on all things Black. That seems to be the little hustle that the white media is setting her up for. Because when you look at what it is that this woman's done and her past associations, you see that for some strange reason, this woman seems to have some kinky fixation as it pertains to race, which we all know means Black. It's not until you look at the rest of her bio that you see that this woman seems to have a nonstop obsession with Black people, particularly with Black women, and it ain't because this woman wants to do us any favors. See, if you want to hear about Black folks, why don't you talk to a Black person? Well, because the white media is trying to find a way to legitimize white people talking for Black folks. That's what this is about. Mrs. Durkin, she's going to be given a thin patina of legitimacy. And that, well, this white woman, she's very knowledgeable about Black folks, and, well, she has our best interest at heart. That's why she's speaking for us, because apparently there were no Black people who you could speak to. That's why they cite her university credentials, is to make it clear that, well, she's better informed, you see. Yeah, the best propagandists usually are. The very first direct quote that they take from Miss Durkin is, "What makes Radoshi's story unique is that hers is the most complete story we have of a female Middle Passage survivor." Now, right off the bat, you got a story that's supposed to be about the last known survivor of the U.S. slave trade, as the white media states it, which is a misleading statement, by the way, deliberately misleading. Then you got this white woman who, to hear USA Today tell it, apparently somehow inspired this article, which doesn't really illuminate anything or say anything, and nonetheless, she's giving all of these bold declarations saying that this woman is a female Middle Passage survivor. Notice how right off the bat they're slipping in the feminist nonsense off top. You will see this again. Apparently in Miss Durkin's lily white world, Black men went to the nice plantations where apparently there were no whips, no sadistic overseers, and apparently no labor either, huh? White feminists are agents of white supremacy. Who do you think it is who raised all of these racist white men that we have to deal with in the first place? And they've been running that gender divide and conquer game on us successfully for decades now, and they're testing the waters with this one. This article is supposed to simply be about the last known survivor of the U.S. slave trade, not the last known female survivor, but that's the way that Durkin tells it. See, they draw you in by having you think, oh, this is going to be about the survivors of American slavery. And then all of a sudden, okay, now that we got you paying attention, here comes the feminist gender divide and conquer crap. See, they're testing us. to see, will black women fall for it again? The Democrats have been trying everything that they can to figure out how do they get black women back on board because they need black folks to prop up the con of American democracy. And this is part of that effort. Now, when you look at the article's headline, it says the last known survivor of the U.S. slave trade is identified. Well, if you read that, then you would think that this was the last person to have come out of slavery, because that's the way that it's written. It would mislead you to that conclusion. But then you read the article, and the first line says, a woman believed to be the last living African-born survivor of the transatlantic slave trade. Wait a minute. The last African-born survivor of the slave trade? Now, come on. Is there some other place where America's slaves would have come from? Were America's slaves born in Siberia? The black folks taken into slavery, were they born in Russia? Were they born in Australia? Were they born on the far side of the moon? It's redundant to say African-born, but the white media puts that in there because they know that since we were the ones who put reparations on the map and got slavery to be a crucial issue of modern presidential elections, now the white media is deciding, what kind of wedges can we drive? And they showed up with a whole handful of wedges. The white media is parsing words with these duplicitous titles, and they're doing it deliberately. Radoshi, the African woman who this white media piece talks about, died in the 1930s. Now, if you read that, you would think that she was the last survivor of American slavery, and this piece does nothing to inform you that this isn't the case. They don't even talk about anyone else who lived longer than her. What the white media doesn't tell you is that Radoshi was not the last surviving American slave. She was merely the last one who had been born in Africa. Well, at least the last one that anyone knows of, because when it comes to black folks, they were not really keeping records like that. Hell, you got a lot of black folks running around today, elderly black folks born in the early 20th century who have no birth certificates, which is why you got Republicans running around saying, well, you need to present a birth certificate if you want to be able to vote, because they want some documentation that they know black folks in particular were denied. We'll be getting back to that in a moment. But it's important to keep in mind that you shouldn't be letting the white media make these declarations to you that, well, we are here to put the stamp of historical white authenticity on the idea that this Radoshi woman was the last survivor of the transatlantic slave trade. They should be telling everybody, well, the last one that we found, but then again, they ain't been looking very hard. I warned you about letting your enemy's propaganda outlets tell you about your own history. Because buried in the article is a single mention that after slavery, Radoshi, who was now being called Sally Smith, continued to live on the plantation with her child. So after slavery was over, she chose to live on the plantation. She chose to live with massa, even after slavery, huh? Now, far be it from me to heap scorn upon or to otherwise cast aspersions on any of the survivors of slavery, but we got to be honest with ourselves about something as black folks. These good white folks, they don't write stuff like this to do us any favors. Okay? They didn't do this because they care so much about black folks. They reported something like this because they think it can be useful to white power. And we also have to be honest about the fact that the reason that so many of our slave rebellions failed was because we had a lot of black folks who were only too chummy with massa in the big house. And when we left those plantations, unfortunately, we took a lot of those bootlicks, turncoats, and these wannabe boule jackasses with us. We brought a lot of the scumbags with us. Now, I'm not saying that Radoshi was one of them, but I am saying that, well, I find it kind of strange that after slavery, she decided she wanted to live in the big house with massa. Keep in mind, when Strom Thurmond got that black woman pregnant when he was in a military academy or wherever that little redneck was at, keep in mind, she kept his secret and her daughter kept that secret till the day that bastard died. And you can't tell me, well, that was because of fear. Nah, we got something else going on here, folks. We need to be honest about that. So no, I'm looking at this Radoshi woman and I'm thinking, while I'm not going to say that she definitely wasn't on our side, I am looking and going, I don't think that these white folks just chose to talk about her simply by coincidence. It wasn't by chance. I think I'm starting to understand what made her story so compelling and interest-worthy to this white woman in England and to the good white folks at USA Today. Let's set the facts straight, family. The last known survivor of America's killing fields, the plantations, was Sylvester McGee. He was born in 1841, and he didn't die until 1971. Now, you heard that right. The man lived up to 130 years? Say, how much attention did he get after his death? Did USA Today cover any research papers about that? Well, there are some good white folks who have decided that they are looking into the matter for the sake of trying to debunk it. As far as they're concerned, we gotta prove that this nigger, that's impossible, couldn't have happened. That's what they're trying to say about the man. Oh, how could this guy have lived to be 130 years old? Well, first of all, the New York Times, as you see here, on their website, you can look and see that they have a digitized version of the piece that they ran on October 16th, 1971, after Sylvester McGee's passing. And in it, the New York Times, the white paper of record, said, and I quote, "His claim to his age was supported by slave trading records and a family Bible since destroyed that had a handwritten note giving his birth date." That's what the New York Times says, the white paper of record. If anyone was going to be running around trying to cast aspersions on the man, you better believe it would be the New York Slime saying that. You're going to have to be real careful. White media is going to be trying to rewrite the records, but WLBT in Mississippi, they did a piece about McGee in 2012. You had some black folks there who were trying to get the man a proper monument meaning headstone in this case. Though I think the man is probably worthy of a statue as well. I think that's without question. But according to this website, Sylvester McGee had no birth certificate, but Chancery Court records in Covington County list him and his father as being passed on to the next of kin when their owner died in 1859. So that's at least for those of you black folks out there who are always asking for proof, and as brother Khalid Muhammad beautifully put it, we know what you really mean. What you're really saying is, where can I find some white folks who will agree with you? Well, we found the New York Times and we found some good old boys down in Mississippi, both of them saying two separate sources to identify this man and to support the claim of his age, trading records. And by trading, you had the New York Times report it, and you also had this website, this news station in Mississippi say the same thing. The Chancery Court records, that's what they're talking about, establishing that both Sylvester and his father were passed on as next of kin when their owner died in 1859. There you got it, folks. There you have it. So there's the white media going ahead and saying, yeah, it's true. And before anyone gets ready to say, well, man, you got a brother who went through all that, keep in mind it was only last year that Richard Overton, America's oldest World War II veteran and the oldest man in the United States, died at the age of 112. He died at the age of 112, and this man was not only America's oldest World War II veteran, he was the oldest man in the United States at the time of his death. So no, Sylvester McGee was not the only veteran of an American war who happened to make it past the century mark, past 110. He wasn't the only man who happened to be the oldest man in the United States. Brother's been doing that for a while now. But the white media doesn't report that. So people need to understand something. When we're talking about slavery and when did slavery end, that's what this is really about. It's about burying that. Because when you start saying, oh, some of those slaves are still alive, well, that becomes a thorny issue, not merely for the white media, but also for the white government and for the white society at large. See, for Generation Xers, Sylvester McGee's death was only a few years before we were born. And for all the baby boomers and even people like Barack Obama, that is definitely in living memory. Sylvester McGee died after Barack Obama was born. Sylvester McGee wasn't some anonymous victim who died way back when. It was only a few years before most of us were born. That's how close to us slavery is. Don't let these people get out here and tell you some bull crap about, oh, that was hundreds of years ago. The hell it was. Why, if you go along with the white media's narrative, why the last survivor of the transatlantic slave trade died not even 80 years ago. So there you go. There you go, family. There it is. The white media monitors what we say in places like this, and they understand exactly how dangerous this kind of talk is. Because what's happening is we are putting into the public consciousness the reality not merely of the debt that's owed to black folks, but also the reality of how close slavery is to the present day. What is considered to be the truth in the mind of the masses? What does society consider to be the truth? Well, mostly what they consider to be the truth is whatever they've been told the most often. And for the longest time, white power has been able to dominate that discussion. Hasn't even been a discussion. It's just been a monologue. We've been completely and thoroughly shut out of it. But now we're asserting ourselves, we're educating people, and we're disproving a lot of the lies, getting rid of a lot of these assumptions. People are hearing stuff that they hadn't heard before. What they're finding out is no, slavery was not hundreds of years ago. In fact, the last person who happened to have been in the killing fields of the American South only died a little over 40 years ago. That's the reality that nobody talks about. And you ain't going to have your good white liberals talking about it either. And you ain't going to be having your good white academics talking about it either. No, I'm pretty sure that our good white pal, Mrs. Durkin, she ain't going to be talking about it. Hannah Durkin ain't doing no research papers on Sylvester McGee. Because that wouldn't be helpful or conducive to white power. That wouldn't help the narrative that they want to forward. You don't hear about Sylvester McGee because white power wants to be able to say, well, that slavery thing happened so long ago. Why, nobody alive today has ever even met a slave, for God's sake. Oh my God, everybody, that's your grandmother's time. Oh man, that's just so long ago. Those of us living today had absolutely nothing to do with that, and nobody from back then could be disadvantaged today, so there's no claims that can be made. I mean, it's not as if anybody in the 20th century was disadvantaged. But nobody's done the work of tracking down who survived slavery and what happened to them in the 20th century. Come on, where's our good friend Ken Burns at? He don't mind doing documentaries about the Civil War. Well, surely he can do documentaries about the survivors of slavery. What happened to all those black folks who came out of slavery? Track what happened to their lives. How many of them survived the killing fields of the American South only to be killed in places like Rosewood and places like Tulsa during the destruction of the Black Wall Street branch in Tulsa, or Charleston, or any of the freaking race riots that took place, Red Hook Summer and all of that in Houston. Whatever. Why doesn't somebody ask some questions about that so people can understand this is what was going on? You had black folks who survived the killing fields of the American South only to be killed in the townships that they established for themselves and their children. Oh, but black folks have not been oppressed. Oh, that was so long ago. Oh, that didn't disadvantage anyone. The only reason that this propaganda piece about this Radoshi woman is out there is because of us. Reparations isn't going away. A critical mass of black people as a group in this country, worse than that, the contingent of black folks who get things done have decided that this is going to be our issue. And because of the fact that it not only forwards our interests, but reparations is basically a catchphrase for tangibles in general. It's the big noisy issue that we're going to use to put people on the spot. It is going to be our way of saying, yeah, we know this is unpopular, and we're using it not merely as our due, but also as our means of showing the severity of our intent. Yeah, we know it ticks you off, and we like that. Yeah, we know it makes you mad, and we don't give a damn. It is our perfect way of sending the message. We're in your face. It happened so long ago. To hell with that. Cut the check. The country can't afford it. If you can afford $3.5 billion for Israel a year, you can go ahead and take it out of their cut. Cut the check. The immigrants ain't gonna like it. Without us, these scumbags wouldn't have had a country to come to. Cut the check. Dang right. Reparations is a great way to hit the reset button with everyone so you can forget what you thought you knew about us. You can forget what you thought you had heard. You can forget all the old expectations. We're crushing them to dust. We're not trying to win a popularity contest anymore. The Negroes who are looking for attention because they want a pat on the head, the Negroes who are trying to get in good with this or that group, those guys, they happen to be a dying breed. Those guys are going to be irrelevant because we're going to make them irrelevant, and white power will be powerless to try to find some way to legitimize them. And it's the black folks who get things done who are making this happen. It ain't the pot smoking, couch riding, sitting on their mama's Barca lounger 8 hours a day smoking a joint, the world star hip hop crowd, the wonder who Drake is beefing with this week crowd. They're not going to get a damn thing done. They're not the ones who drive events. They will follow us after. It will not take all that long to start getting those scumbags on board because they are followers. They're sheep. And we are the shepherds. For too long, we've been letting white power run around like a little sheepdog, barking at us, and we're being pushed over to this side or that side. Nah, not anymore. The shepherd's back on duty. And he's using that shepherd's staff to smack that sheepdog over the head and tell him get lost. This is my flock. White power, through its white pundits, its white politicians, and its white propagandists, they have miseducated the public to not take responsibility for where their prosperity comes from. They have indoctrinated everybody with talking points. Everybody knows that slavery is where the seed money for this country came from. Why is the U.S. richer than everyone else? Because it had huge advantages, principally that it had an enormous cash crop, cotton, which bootstrapped the economy, was produced for free. And nobody can compete with free. The United States had the biggest slavery industry in human history. That's where America's wealth came from. And you got these other folks coming in here going, ooh, there's still some left. We gonna come in here and help y'all solidify these gains and keep it away from these Negroes. And what's happening is black folks are saying, forget that. Forget that. Damn right we're flexing on everyone else. Because for too damn long, we've been sitting on our hands trying to figure out if we could persuade, cajole, if we could get some sympathy, if we could find a way to get people to feel sorry for us and see our condition and recognize their part in it. It's like, well, forget about that. Sympathy is overrated. Friendship is overrated. Family is what we need. And this is how we are aggregating those familial ties. And white power is trying to figure out some way that they can corrupt and contaminate our discussion. Now, they're not able to control what I say. They're not able to control what the new voices of black media say. So what they're doing is they're using their own media outlet in the hope that they can get to the non-black public. They're going to go ahead and talk to them. Hey, we got any good white liberals listening? Hey, do we have any black immigrants listening? Hey, do we have any black women who still identify with feminism even at this late date listening? Come on, we got to talk about the last female survivor. This is all about black women. Why are we always talking about black men? Actually, we talk about black men and black women equally when it comes to slavery. We mentioned Harriet Tubman. We mentioned Sally Hemings. We mentioned Sojourner Truth. So you can get out of here with all of that black women are left out crap. Black women are mentioned as often, if not more, than black men. But you got white people who too many of y'all listen to, and that because what you're really listening to is, oh, these white folks, I got a chance to get in good with them. They pay me some attention, so I'll say yes to whatever they say because it's them saying it. That's what it really is, and they know it. They know the buttons that they're pushing, and you know the buttons too. So yeah, everyone's getting exposed. Everybody's getting called out on this. White power has taught the public a whole litany of lies and talking points that they can use to dodge and deflect and distract from where their prosperity came from, so they ain't got to face up to it. It's the white media has taught the public all sorts of lying talking points. And the main one that they've used is that reparations are only for whomever was specifically wronged. Well, we're talking, if it's a question of damages to be paid. Well, you can. How do we pay damages to the descendants of someone who was wronged? Well, they have to prove that they were wronged as well. And that being the case, we can prove that chattel slavery might have come to an end. Black folks locked up on plantations might have come to an end, but that's the only thing that stopped. The slave quarters became socialized. Instead of being specifically on the John White plantation, the slave quarters were enforced through economics. You made it where there were no black neighborhoods, there were just giant slave quarters. And also made it where black folks were held at the level of a slave by systematically locking black folks out of all avenues of economics and finance and commerce, and using the power of the state to do it. You had private interests coordinating with public leadership in order to make this happen. It wasn't an accident, it's public policy. Been so for the longest damn time. So you can't deny the fact that all the ills of slavery continued afterwards. Everything you name from slavery continued afterwards. The only difference was it went from being a private sector institution to a public sector one. If anything, the government's culpability in our oppression increased after 1865, not decreased. And whatever was done to black folks on those plantations continued to be done afterwards and done to their descendants. So no, you don't get to say that, well, it's only, the cutoff point is 1865. The only thing you can make a claim to is what happened on the plantations, because every time black folks made a claim, they were told in court, we don't care how much of a claim you got, we're not hearing it. And when we talk about public-private partnerships, nowhere is this odious, incestuous white alliance more apparent than when it comes to the white media and the white government, the propaganda arm and the administrative arms of white supremacy. Because the propaganda arm every day indoctrinates people with the lie that, well, reparations can only be valid for the specific person who was wronged. Now, if this was an auto manufacturer's defect, or if it was an industrial polluter who contaminated the groundwater in the town where you grew up, that would be one thing. But what happened with slavery, this was something that was done to an entire class of people nationwide. It wasn't something that happened just to whoever bought a freaking Peugeot or whoever brought a freaking Nova, whoever bought a Ford Pinto. This wasn't something that just happened to people, say, in Flint, Michigan. This was something that was done to an entire class of people nationwide, wherever they lived, whoever they were, not by benefit of what car you bought or what neighborhood you lived in, but specifically based on the color of your skin and who you were descended from. Oh, you were descended from these folks who we held in bondage? Well, we're going to make sure that you remain in an oppressed position. We're going to make sure that you remain completely and thoroughly disadvantaged. Oh, all that wealth that we got as a result of your enslavement, that becomes generational, and we have to find a way to fix and lock generational poverty onto you. Our generational prosperity is going to be the result of your generational poverty. And it was not the result of anything that somebody accidentally did. Ford accidentally missed some of their quality control when it came to those Pintos and those exploding gas tanks. Oh, well, it was an accident that the Flint Reservoir accidentally used water from an old, nasty sewage facility. All of that corroded water that they use, all that toxic water that they pumped through the pipes, well, that was an accident. Well, it wasn't a damn thing accidental about slavery. It wasn't a damn thing accidental about Jim Crow or segregation or the black codes or systematic hyper-incarceration of black folks. Nothing accidental about that at all. This was the policy of a geopolitical entity. This was not the policy of one corporation or the action of a couple of odious town officials in one little hamlet. And not even one that collapsed and went away. It would be one thing if the United States was like the Soviet Union. If the United States collapsed in 1989, it would be one thing, but that didn't happen. The same government that enslaved us, the exact same government who legislated punishments for any black person who refused to be a slave and punishments for anyone who helped black people to escape slavery, who declared that we are not even 3/5 human beings, which, by the way, is still law. The 14th Amendment didn't change that. The same government who declared that a black person has no rights that a white man is bound to respect, that government still exists today. The United States government was not conquered by some foreign power. The United States government did not cease to exist. It didn't collapse or otherwise break up or go away. That government is still around and more powerful than it's ever been. This is a government which on countless occasions has used its military to deprive black people in this country, those of us who came out of slavery. It used its military in order to deprive us of our property, to deprive us of our freedom and even our lives. And all this after the alleged end of slavery. Look what happened with the destruction of the Tulsa branch of the Black Wall Street. They brought in the National Guard. That's the Army. And when the Army showed up, they weren't shooting at the white marauders who were going on a rampage through this black township. They aimed their guns at black people. That was the U.S. government's Army who did that. And you see it all the way to the present, what was going on in Ferguson and Baltimore. They bring in the U.S. Army in order to enforce black subjugation. This ain't some handful of white marauders who nobody knows where they came from. They had hoods over their heads. This was a freaking U.S. Army that they called in. The plantations may have been what happened to Sylvester McGee and Redoshi, but slavery has happened to every single generation of us since 1609. This country's absolute abject barbarism against those of us brought to this hellhole didn't stop in 1865, and the debt that is owed to us did not end with Redoshi or Sylvester McGee either. Their deaths did not close the book on American slavery. Their deaths did not mark the end of any possible claim to reparations. If anything, it reinforced that claim and made it more urgent that it occur. That's something I want to make sure that you understand. If the white media or the white government or any white people, especially the pukes who run YouTube, call themselves trying to find some excuse, you ain't going to find one. USA Today is not going to be allowed to try to fool people and lie to people and insinuate that the last survivor of slavery died 80 plus years ago, which is what they're really trying to get across, at least to white viewers, white readers. That's what they would take away from it. That's the only thing that would be of interest to them. That's what they instinctively will look for. Ooh, you're talking about a survivor of slavery. Oh, you got film of her. When did she die? How long ago was that? Oh, 1937? Well, geez, that was the Great Depression. Come on. Playing some game of chronology, that's not going to work. You don't dodge the debt owed by trying to use cop-outs like, I didn't own any slaves. Well, neither did John Adams, but that didn't stop him from opposing the abolition of slavery in Massachusetts. Chief Justice Roger B. Taney, he was the guy, the infamous Chief Justice, who presided over the Dred Scott decision, and he was the one who said a black man has no rights that a white man is bound to respect. Well, he didn't personally own slaves either. Did you know that? Oh, he was racist as the day was long, obviously. But Chief Justice Taney, he didn't personally own any slaves. Now, his father did, and he personally benefited from the practice of slavery, even though he didn't own any slaves, and clearly that attitude was passed on to him. He internalized it and carried it on. And Taney's attitude perfectly mirrors the mendacious and duplicitous attitude of this society where anti-black racism is concerned. As long as it's a white man we're talking about and his victims are black, then there's always going to be a ready excuse to explain away his crimes. There's always going to be some half-assed excuse to say, well, it wasn't as bad as all that. If he was a slave owner, then he was a man of his time. And if he wasn't a slave owner, well, he didn't have anything to do with slavery anyway, so he's not responsible. That's what they drag out for Strom Thurmond and Jesse Helms And all of the rest of the racists and rednecks, they always drag that one out. Well, you can't say that he's responsible. He had nothing to do with slavery. Yeah, and every time you look up, he's trying to put forward all sorts of legislation and policies that mirror the black codes, or rather the slave codes, because that's what the black codes were. It was nothing more than a renaming of the slave codes of the 19th and 18th centuries. Well, this guy, sure, he's taken these slave codes and put them on the books, but he didn't own any slaves, so he's not really responsible for that. It's just an attitude problem he's got. That's all. That's what the white liberal tells you. When Taney said that a black man has no rights that a white man is bound to respect, that also included the first right, which is the right to redress of grievances. They ignored the rightful claims of Dred Scott, Plessy versus Ferguson, and all the other survivors of the plantations who demanded recompense. And was it because these black people had not been wronged? Was it because they had no case? Was it because they could not prove damages? No, it's because of white fiat. Stop acting as if these white supremacists have some sense of fair play, because they don't. That's part of the reason why all this garbage about status correction needs to stop. Black folks talking about status correction. In order for anyone to support status correction, what is that based on? That idea of status correction is based on a supposition that has no basis in fact, a supposition that is merely a fever dream of your own decrepit imagination. That the white supremacists who run this country and have run the world for quite a long time now, that these guys have some inherent sense of fair play, and they don't. You did not sign some document that got you into slavery. So how the hell is a document that you sign with white supremacy supposed to get you out of slavery? The white supremacists understand the game that they're playing. The white supremacist has never signed an agreement with anyone that he's honored. Not with the Native Americans, not with the Asians, not even with other white people. He understands that the world that he's set up is not governed by justice, it is governed by force or the credible threat thereof. And that force comes in many forms: political force, social force, but when it comes to black folks, the most violent force used against us has been economic force. He understands that. And black folks got to stop making excuses for our refusal to use the means of force that are at our disposal. Political force, social force, whatever the world it takes. When it comes to toppling white supremacy, everything's on the table. When it comes to black folks, all we ever hear is, you're living in the past, forget the past. Meanwhile, white folks are constantly making movies and TV shows and writing books and essays and lectures about their past. They wallow in their past, they drown in their past, they saturate themselves and us in their past, fiction though it is. Yet when it comes to black folks, all of a sudden, stop living in the past, buddy. What they really mean is stop reminding them of what they owe you. Stop reminding them of the wrongs they committed against you. That's what it really means. Because that's what our history in the clutches of white supremacy has been. It has been one non-stop crime against us. And the criminals want us to stop reminding them. No chance. Drop dead and go to hell. You will never be allowed to forget about the greatest crime in human history and the fact that you carried it out. And the white media is not going to give you some BS talking points that you can use. You ain't talking your way out of this debt. The society has been successfully conditioned by the white media to use their asinine deflections that reparations aren't valid because the survivors are all dead, which that line only gets brought up when it comes to black folks here in the United States. When it comes to black folks in the U.S., well, you can't pay reparations to people who are dead. Well, you pay reparations to the survivors of those who are wronged all the time. The Jews prove how false that claim is, as did the Native Americans and the Japanese. What you see here is the white media attempting to promote yet another of their endless string of false narratives that the last survivor of the transatlantic slave trade died in the 1930s, and they make sure to include that prominently and to repeat it. They want to make sure you get that. That Radoshi woman, she died a long time ago. This is meant to reinforce the lie that reparations are only applicable to those who were imprisoned on the plantations. And you better stop talking that stupid talk yourselves. That is an invalid lie, and you're supposed to treat it as the lie that it is. This is the white media trying to push back the date of what they would try to falsely define as a legitimate claim for reparations. They're trying to push the date back as far as possible. It's like Alexandria Cortez. Hey, let's talk about reparations. Well, only if Hispanics are included. How the hell you figure that, woman? Well, reparations are really about social issues. What happened to black folks was not a social issue, it was a racial one, specific to us. Well, reparations should start in the 1930s with FDR. You see, in the 1930s is when it should start, and it should include everybody except for black people. See, this is flooding the zone with lies, if I may use a sports analogy. The idea is create noise. It's not a matter of trying to forward one particular lying narrative. With the white media, it's best to just throw as many lying narratives in there as possible. You're trying to muddy the waters. You're trying to create as much noise as possible. A constant din, a constant storm of, well, what about this? What about that? In the 1930s, in the 19th century, FDR, what about this? All these groups over here. That's the idea. Just try to throw everything in there. Try to drown out the narrative, the coherent, irresistible narrative that the new voices of black media have been successfully promoting. Just make it where everybody sounds off on reparations and make it where reparations is an issue for everyone. We're going to drag everybody into it and everybody will sound off on it and we'll just drown you Negroes out. That's what the white media is attempting to do. But before they can do that, they got to try to lay the foundation for this would-be strategy. And that's where Radoshi comes in. Because the way that they wrote this piece to set up a number of their little sub-strategies. First strategy is the one that's supposed to appeal to the white majority in this country, which is, well, let's just say that any claims of slavery ended in the 1930s. If there was going to be a claim, it should have been made in the 1930s. Too late now, you know. This way, white people and their non-white flunkies can say, well, the last person who would have had a claim to reparations died in the 30s, so what can you do? This country doesn't owe anyone anything. You Negroes, your condition is your own fault. It surely can't be anything that white people have done. But there's also another ulterior motive for bringing up this Radoshi woman in particular. The white media has a fallback position. When it comes to their lies, they make sure that their lies work on multiple levels. If they can't stop reparations, then they'll do what they did with affirmative action. Make it for everyone, which means that the economic gap, which is where the financial economic violence against black people, that's where the rubber meets the road, the economic gap. Everyone else is going to be given $10 while some black folks might get 25 cents. And that's the entire point. Maintain that gap between foundational black Americans and everyone else. That's the goal. And the white media is pushing that. They're trying to set that up. They know exactly what they're doing. They're thinking that they're going to set that up. If they can't stop reparations, if we stay on our square and successfully push this through and make it where this issue becomes a make or break proposition for at least one of the major parties, and the white media is like, okay, we're going to have to do something, some half-baked sort of measure. We'll say that it's reparations when it's clearly not. But we're going to make sure that whatever it is, we're going to make sure it's for everyone because we need black folks to understand that you're going to face maximum resistance from white supremacy. Well, we already know that. And they are going to face maximum persistence from us. They want to use black immigrants as the thin end of the wedge in this case. And that's the reason why they mentioned that Radoshi was born in Africa, because that's supposed to be something that any of the Caribbeans or the Haitians or the African immigrants, they read that and see that, and that's supposed to make their hearts go pitter-pat. They threw in that Africa reference. That they want to make it clear, well, she was born in Africa. And this is something the white supremacists have used black immigrants for a long time now. The handful of black immigrants are supposed to be used as a convenient straw man for white supremacy so they can point to the one or two black immigrants who they allow to have a university job or who they allow to have some corporate managerial post, and they can say, well, see, these black people are doing well, so there's no racism. And isn't that the line that they've been using? Is that not precisely the talking point that they've been using? There's only a handful of black immigrants, comparatively speaking. I'm talking about, forget about in comparison to the majority of the society as a whole. I mean, comparison to black folks in America. How many black folks in America came out of the killing fields of the American South? And how many of them came over here on a boat from some island or another continent? You can't compare the two. And yet that's exactly what white power has attempted to do, to create a false comparison. I told you about Amy Chua's book. Amy Chua was that woman who wrote the Battle Hymn of the Tiger Moms, or whatever the hell that crap was. Well, she wrote another book with her husband, some Jewish guy whose name escapes me at the moment. The book was named The Triple Package. I did a whole video essay about that crap where she was praising and extolling the superiority of whites and Asians. That's what the book was about. It was basically talking about how the Chinese deserved to run the Philippines because the Filipinos they were just not able to handle their own affairs. And well, you've got ruling classes everywhere you see, except the problem is when it comes to most of the world, these ruling classes in these other countries that Amy Chua was trying to talk about, they're usually nothing more than sock puppets of white power. She tried to talk about some groups in Kenya, ethnic groups in Kenya or what have you. Kenya is nothing more than a colony of Britain. In fact, it practically is a colony because they still consider themselves to be subjects of the British Crown. But that's something that Amy Chua doesn't tell you. And she's not going to tell you because that's how propaganda is. Propaganda is not meant to educate, it's meant to indoctrinate. And her book, which was a half-baked maneuver to cover up the obvious race baiting, she tried to shoehorn Nigerians into her book. Why, look at the Nigerians in the United States, you see. Well, you see, now never mind the fact that, as I covered before in my video essay about this book, one of the main things she tried to point to was culture. Culture is supposed to be their code word for race. You hear it from the white supremacists all the time, whether it's Milo Snuffleupagus or Ben Shapiro. These clowns like to use the word culture as a synonym for race, rather as a pseudonym for race. That's supposed to be just their way of saying race by another term. Okay, well, if you try to claim that it's their culture, what culture do those of us who came out of American slavery have? Our names were taken away, our African culture taken away, our language, and words are the most important means of holding on to one's culture because it happens to help define the currency of thought. I've always said that words are the currency of thought. And when you have words that have a particular definition, you're linking people to a particular mindset. Well, whatever hell mindset we had was stripped away from us by force. Radoshi was not called Radoshi. Her name, when she got here, was Sally Smith. So we had our culture taken away from us. Our thought process is taken away from us. Our loyalty system taken away from us. Our knowledge of the past taken away from us. Our folkways, mores, and African minds taken away from us. So what culture do we have? We have a culture that says black is inferior. Look in the dictionary. A culture that says a black man has no rights that a white man is bound to respect. A culture where the founding document of the law of the land says that anyone who looks like a black person is only 3/5 a human being. Amy Chua says nothing about that. The culture that we have is a white supremacist indoctrination. That's the culture that we've got. A culture that does not tell us how great we are. And by the way, you read Amy Chua's little crappy book, The Triple Package, and at no point does she mention that. The very crux of her book, which is that you don't have superior races, you have superior cultures. And then she only goes on to mention white ones and Asian ones. And she mentions the Nigerians simply to give herself rhetorical cover. And the first thing that you say is, wait a minute, what culture do black folks in the United States have? They don't have a culture of their own because their names are not even their own. So doesn't that prove, okay, well, that does prove that black folks are clearly an exception to this rule and you need an exceptional answer for this exceptional circumstance, right? Amy Chua doesn't even discuss it. Because the whole point of propaganda is not to give answers. It is to try to justify a pre-existing policy. But she only gave a single one and done blink and you'll miss it reference to the Nigerians. And it was her little would-be deflection. It was so ham-handed, so blatantly insincere that even other Asians called Amy Chua out on it. Even Cenk Uygur, undercover bigot that he is, even he had to call her out on it and say, you put the Nigerians in there just to give yourself cover. Even he had to throw that. Even he had to say it. And when Cenk Uygur, of all people, the scumbag that he is, when he feels compelled to say, come on, I got to call a flag on the play, it's pretty obvious what you did, that's when you know you done messed up. But understand, these black immigrants are a tiny handful of the total black population in the U.S., but they serve a very crucial, important function under white supremacy. They're not letting in too many of these black migrants. I would love to say that they're the slowest growing demographic in the country, but they're not growing at all. So that being the case, white power is looking and going, all we got to do is to move this slow moving genocide forward as we increase the economic strangulation on the black folks who came out of American slavery. As the foundational black Americans are progressively starved for resources, we will up the propaganda by pointing to these black immigrants and saying, well, look at these guys. Hey, there's some executive at NBC and she's a Nigerian American. And there's some other guy over here at CNN. And there's some person at this publishing house. And there's this university professor. Hey, Kamala Harris's father is from Jamaica, don't you know? Well, look, these black immigrants, they seem to be doing fine. We don't know what's wrong with these guys, these foundational black Americans over here. We don't know what the hell's wrong with them. But clearly the system's working. It must be these guys. Because all these other black folks over here, they're doing just fine. We know because we paid them off and singled them out. We went ahead and put them on the payroll. And we're not putting any others on the payroll. And we'll be damned if we let any more of these Haitians or these Jamaicans in here. We have rolled up the drawbridge. So that's the game that they're playing. It's going to be a game of strangle the majority of black folks in this country for resources, which is the main means by which genocides are carried out, resource deprivation. And then when it comes to these black immigrants, well, for them, their numbers will be contained because we can use the white media to make it where people go, well, these black folks may be dying out, but hey, these black immigrants are doing fine. And hey, it can't be about race. Otherwise, why wouldn't we be singling out these black immigrants too? It's the game that they're playing. USA Today put out this story. They have the third largest circulation of any daily newspaper in the country. You know that they didn't just decide out of the blue that slavery was a fascinating topic today. As Dr. John Henrik Clarke taught, this is out there because white power wants it out there. That's what you got to understand when it comes to the white media. What, you think that when you look at the nightly news or the midday news or CNN or whatever, you think that when they put a story in front of you, it's because you had some group of white folks sitting around in an editorial meeting deciding that this is the most important issue of the day? Like hell. The news media is no different than any other show that the white media puts on. It happens to be prepared, presented, packaged, and pushed to you like any other media product. No different than the latest episode of Law and Order, Who Gives a Damn? That's how the white media works at the news level too. They're not reporting all the news that's fit to print. They're reporting whatever is fit for white power. That's what they're doing. And you need to understand that. Do not let them lie to you and make you think that, oh, this issue, well, this Radoshi woman's just so interesting. All of a sudden, why is the white media talking about this now? Because we're talking about it. We took the initiative, and we have been driving the narrative and the events, and we left the white media in the dust. We let those bastards in the dust, and they've been scrambling to catch up ever since. White power's trying to catch up to us and get out in front of this one. They're trying to get out in front of this whole black empowerment / reparations narrative. They're trying to get out in front of tangibles because they know that reparations is the thin end of the wedge. And they're trying to break that wedge as soon as possible or take the hammer away from us or whatever they can do. They're trying to mislead and misdirect and take us off course. Because as I've always taught you, white power believes in duality. Not merely because they're a bunch of fork-tongued liars, but because of the fact they understand duplicity is a strong tool when it comes to misleading people. Just the technique of creating a false association in people's minds, that's what helped W kick off the war in Iraq. He would use the term Iraq and Saddam Hussein, or 9/11 and Saddam Hussein, or Al Qaeda and Saddam Hussein constantly in the same sentences, to the point that people thought that Saddam Hussein had something to do with 9/11. And then when he was pushed on the issue in front of the world, George Bush had to admit there is no evidence that Iraq had anything to do with the September 11th attacks. Yeah, but it didn't matter. Once they got into Iraq, once they had access to the oil, they're in control of the oil, which was really about. How come the war in Iraq's going so poorly? Well, who said it's going poorly? You seem to think that the entire idea is that Iraq is supposed to be a pacified, prosperous democracy. White supremacy does not care to create more competition for itself. Iraq is in precisely the condition that they want Iraq in. They want Iraq to be in a perpetual state of destabilization. That way the oil comes to the Koch brothers or whomever easy and cheap, and there is no indigenous homegrown authority there who's going to mess with it. Because when you look at Venezuela and how Hugo Chavez bent the Koch brothers over and gave them a heave-ho, and how Nicolas Maduro is saying, nah, forget it, I'll nationalize the oil fields. That's what happens when you don't have a destabilized government, when you got a government that's actually able to set policy and set prices. Now, you see this article about slavery and about this Radoshi woman, and some of y'all think, finally, the white media is talking about slavery again. They are never going to be putting out stories that are meant to help enhance black empowerment or to push black empowerment or to promote black empowerment. They're not talking about slavery because they're trying to do you any favors. Every time you see the white media doing something about slavery, you better have on your skeptic goggles, which is nothing more than common sense. These are the people who have been cheerleading for black lynchings. Go back and read what was happening during the lynchings. The white media was the main one saying, well, old Jimmy Smith over there, he put his hands on some white women, and some virtuous white men brought this vile Negro to justice. The white media has been cheerleading lynchings from time immemorial. Same way that they did with Trayvon Martin, same way that they did with Mike Brown, same way that they did with Oscar Grant, same way that they did with Eric Garner, same way that they did with Freddie Gray. Every time you look up a black man's getting killed, white people decide they're going to murder a black person, the white media comes along and explains, well, this is the reason why that nigger deserved to die. They have not changed their strategy one iota since the 19th century, and they're not going to. Black folks see an article like this and they think, well, at least the white media is talking about slavery again. Oh, this is helpful to us somehow. You're not sure how it is, but you think it's helpful. Talking about slavery ain't the point. The point is what's going to be done to make up for slavery to those of us who survived it. What the hell is going to be done to make this right? And the only thing that can be done to make it right is to cut the check. Because when white people look at an article like this, the thing that they take away from it is, so the last survivor of slavery died in the 1930s. Well, now we know what to say specifically whenever someone talks about reparations. That's what white folks take away from the story. They read it for the sake of trying to figure out, well, can you discredit this woman or can we minimize it? Oh, it happened. She died 80 plus years ago. Well, you're not going to put that on white folks. Well, you see, she may have had a claim, but you Negroes today, you guys don't. And by the way, black immigrants, these foreign-born black people or their children like Joy Reid and Roly-Poly Martin and Angela Rye with lettuce and tomatoes on the side, they can read something like this and say, hey, this Radoshi woman was born in Africa? Well, I or my parents were born in the Congo or born in wherever, and we came here too, just like she did, so we're no different than her. Hey, this reparations thing, this really ought to include those of us who had nothing to do with American slavery, because Radoshi, she was born in Africa. Well, you're not going to forget about the part about how she went through the killing fields in the U.S., right? Yeah, you make sure to mention that too. Well, she was born in Africa. That's the important thing. Why are you trying to drive divisions? By the way, family, do you know who I just described? Joy Reid. Neither of Joy Reid's parents went through slavery in the U.S., But damned if she ain't gonna pretend like she can speak for us though, huh? Damned if she ain't going to decide that, well, I'm the responsible black person here. Well, you see, I come from a different viewpoint than you guys, and I went to a good school, and it's not your fault that you guys are a bunch of ignorant louts. It's racism's fault, but I'm best suited to speak for black folks because, look, I just got a better education, and I'm using that education to speak up for black people, see? And that's the same crap that Angela Rye tries to pull. That's the attitude of superiority that these bastards have. That, oh, they got to hang around some white folks at a white university and they got their white education and their white talking points and their white job at some white company where they got their white pals who are giving them a white paycheck. And because of that, that makes them best suited to speak for black people. Because they're just so black, you see. They're so rooted in black, you see. Yeah, white power chooses its flunkies well, but then again, it's not too hard to find some black flunkies for white power. Tragically, we got a lot of black folks lining up to see if there's any bootlick jobs, any bootlick positions left. But at the end of the propaganda piece, they throw in a quote from this Hannah Durkin woman, the white woman from England. She wrote a research paper about an African enslaved in the U.S. And what she says is, sadly, we still haven't begun to reckon with the injustices of transatlantic slavery and its legacies. Radoshi's story is a reminder that transatlantic slavery is part of our very recent history, and hopefully it allows us to finally reclaim or at least reflect on the story of Radoshi and the countless women like her. Now, let's deal with this last bit first. This Durkin woman says, we haven't begun to reckon with the injustices of transatlantic slavery and its legacies. First of all, what's this we stuff? When she says we, she should have made it clear she means white people. They're the ones who haven't reckoned with the injustices of what they and their forefathers and their descendants have done. Those of us who are the survivors of slavery, we deal with it every freaking minute of every day. We have been the only ones who have reckoned with it. Secondly, she does the same old intentionally vague lip service about slavery and its legacies. Now, I know that will sound good to some of you because you're so desperate for a white person to give even the slightest acknowledgement that our oppression has continued long after the cotton fields. But problem is, that's all that this white woman did. She gave the slightest acknowledgement to it. And to me, to have some person come along and decide that they would take the greatest crime in human history and that they would just gloss over it like that, to me, that's sprinkling sugar on crap. She wants to have it both ways. She wants to be able to say transatlantic slavery is part of our recent history, and that's about the only sensible thing that she said. Yes, this is part of recent history, but it's also part of current events. And that's what needs to be said. Don't talk about it as merely history. Don't try to compartmentalize it. This is still going on. What happened to Radoshi has continued to happen. So for her to try to get on her moral high horse and say that it's part of recent history, but not to acknowledge that it's still going on, I see what the hell she's doing, and you need to see it too. To mention the legacy of slavery only in passing, that's to treat the black codes, Jim Crow segregation, and the systematic hyper-incarceration and economic destruction of our people as if it was just a small thing. Well, we don't want to dwell on it because it wasn't that important. When our degradation, anti-black racism is the central issue of the day. It is the only issue that matters. Iraq, Afghanistan, so-called global warming, whether it's real or phony, I'm more concerned about the economic destruction of my people because that's the issue that matters. You make it where the survivors of slavery have economic power in their hands. And a lot of these other issues are going to start to get ironed out because it's going to be very difficult for you to be pushing for wars in foreign countries when you got some black power brokers who are saying, you know what, we're going to use our mainstream media that reaches tens of millions of people every single day and tell folks the real truth of what this latest push for some war in some foreign country is about. Going to be kind of difficult for American imperialism to persist when you got black folks, the main ones who have been on the business end of the white whip for the last 500 years, when you got black folks in a position to come to the table of power and start to deal, and to start to make some power moves and to stop some of these agendas, because your white liberals damn sure ain't doing it. If they were going to do it, they'd have done it by now. But there's another crime that this Durkin woman committed here, worse than merely brushing past the issue. She didn't even have the decency to mention reparations, and that's going to be the key issue. We're going to condition these bastards that if you are not advocating for reparations, then you are one of the anti-black racists who needs to be spotlit and called out. Oh, well, I forgot. Well, we ain't going to forget about you, Hannah Durkin. If you mention slavery and do not mention reparations, then that makes you part of the problem. To say that slavery brought subsequent issues, that slavery had a legacy, but to not also acknowledge that this reality makes reparations as valid now as it's ever been, that is to deny it altogether. That's what she did. She was denying reparations by the side door. But of course, to discuss the remedy to the oppression of our people, that wasn't the reason that USA Today put this propaganda piece out. And finally, that line about Radoshi and women like her, because white people are still trying to figure out if that black feminist horse still has a few more miles left in it. That's why they got to throw that in. She knew exactly what she was doing, and USA Today knew what she was doing too. This will be a norm of white media coverage of slavery, by the way, and of the white elections. They already understand that basically black men as a group have pretty much solidified and gotten on code that forget about all this garbage, because black men have been the ones most affected by the hyper-incarceration state. Black women have been affected too, to be sure, but black men have been the main ones who the white police state has been aiming its guns and its prison cells at. So the white media that do all these puff pieces in the 80s and 90s, psychologically masturbating black women, now that they've been a little less friendly, what they're going to try to do is they're going to try to see if they can do this pivot. We're going to pivot back to girls rule the world and you go girl and black girls rock. And that's what this is about. We're going to start we're going to start diddling black women's egos again. And we're going to see if this gets them back on board. This Durkin woman, in addition to being a propped up tool of white power calling herself speaking for us, when you look at her bio on the Newcastle University website, what you see as far as her current research, that tells you everything you need to know about her. She's working on a book project. Notice that the research paper wasn't an excerpt from her manuscript. She didn't even have the decency to do a manuscript. But her book project is going to examine black and Jewish women's contributions to mid-century ethnographic and autobiographical writing, cinema, and modern dance. Think about that. This woman is a lecturer on film and media, but where the hell's her documentary at about any of these black folks? And her current book project is about black and Jewish women's contributions. This woman, this is not some black advocate, not even a white liberal black advocate. She's just a white feminist. She goes on to write, I show how ethnographic film became a key device for black and Jewish women seeking to revise racialized and gendered scientific and cultural paradigms. There you go. There you go. Seeking to revise racialized and gendered paradigms. Yeah, we all know who the gender applies to, and it ain't white women. Well, if we're going to be talking about ethnographic film, especially from the early 20th century, why we can't leave out all of the Jewish executives who own the movie studios. We can't leave out such Jewish ethnographic films as Al Jolson's The Jazz Singer. See, Al Jolson was Jewish, and he did more than most to be promoting blackface. In fact, that's what The Jazz Singer was about. It's about this Jewish guy who apparently has spent too much time around the Schwarzes. And this is what he comes up with as his kind of lopsided homage. So I wonder why Miss Durkin doesn't feel. I just have to wonder if she would feel the need to go ahead and include Al Jolson in that, because we're going to be talking about Jewish ethnographic film contributions. Well, at the very least, we should include the jazz singer too. And we should also ask, what were the good Jewish film executives who owned these studios doing while black people were not able to even be in front of a movie camera for any of these Jewish-owned, Jewish-run movie studios? I wonder if Mrs. Durkin ever tackles that. Does she show any of these good Jewish women who decide to tackle that issue? It's a fair question. Then she writes, I then show how these women, excluded by sexual and racial barriers from pursuing conventional academic careers, etc. Notice how we went from racialized and gendered paradigms to sexual and racial barriers. So she went from mentioning race first, which would have meant that black women were the primary subject of her would-be book, to sexual first, which, as a good white feminist, means that's code for white women. Notice how she did the switcheroo like that? That's what this Hannah Durkin woman is. An agent of white supremacy coming to pimp the feminist line and see if there are any black women willing to take the bait. And I didn't highlight it, but in her little bio here, she writes, I map for the first time the creative techniques that they, I assume she's talking about Jewish and black women, because let's be honest here, she's putting Jewish first. She says that she's mapping these techniques for the first time. I like that. You got this white woman who's calling herself being some sort of pioneer of black people's history. Because when she talks about what it is that she's mapping, it's nothing but black communities in the U.S. South, the Caribbean, and Africa. And I thought it was a joke that she talks about to facilitate cross-cultural exchange. No, our culture has been raped, has been robbed, has been plundered by white power, by white people like Mrs. Durkin. There was no cross-cultural exchange. What exchange? What the hell did we get from these white people who were sitting here ripping off ragtime, ripping off jazz, ripping off blues, ripping off our dance, ripping off our slang, ripping off our style? What the hell did we get in exchange? What did they give us in exchange? Please tell me what the hell did we get? We already know what they took from us, so what was this exchange about? What did white people exchange with us? The lynchings? The fire hoses, the attack dogs, the church burnings with our children inside, might I add, dragging people behind cars. What the hell exchange was there that she's talking about? So yeah, that's what this Hannah Durkin woman is, a white feminist showing up calling herself going to be the mouthpiece for black folks and pushing the white feminine line to see if there's anyone still dumb enough to take a bite, anyone still dumb enough to bite that line. But just like the mythical black-brown alliance or black-yellow alliance, we got these would-be black Jewish allies who are doing nothing more than using our struggle, our history as a springboard to promote themselves. And yeah, if you look at the excerpt here from her bio, she also says that her doctorate, which is now a forthcoming book, examines the international film careers and writings of Josephine Baker, who we've all heard of, and Catherine Dunham. Wonder if she's related to Lena Dunham, who nobody's heard of. And by the way, this kind of stuff, this is nothing more than a white woman who's looking for some sort of contract with a white media corporation, maybe a mini series or a movie or something. That's what she's doing. Hopefully her book will form the basis for an HBO miniseries. That's probably what she's fishing for. But again, you have one of these would-be allies who's doing nothing more than trying to use us as a means to amplify and promote themselves. They will interject feminism into the discussion because we, black people as a group, are speaking in one voice, and they're going to start trying to see if there are any stress fractures or divisions that they can capitalize on. And they're not going to be doing it just one time. Expect to see this repeatedly, and expect to see some people who previously hadn't been talking about feminism and black patriarchy and all the rest of that crap. Expect to see a lot of these morons coming out of the woodwork saying that garbage. They understand that when they see the white media, the best way to get some crumbs from the white media's table is to talk like them. So when they see a white media puff piece get put out there, or a white media propaganda piece, they start looking at the words that are used, the phrases that are used. Okay, I'm going to start dropping those phrases to let white power know that I want a paycheck from them too. I want some crumbs too. Expect to see that crap. Some of y'all were surprised when Big Bird, whoever that clown was, who claimed that he was part of a legitimate reparations group. Yeah, a legitimate reparations group that ain't produced a damn thing, because under white supremacy, that's what a legitimate reparations group is. Legitimate reparations groups are groups that don't do anything, that don't move the needle, that don't push the issue forward. Legitimate reparations groups are ones who make reparations invalid and a non-issue. Expect to see the white media promoting more of these clowns that you never heard of. Yeah, this one came from a white woman, but the next one will be coming from a black person. And they're going to be capitalizing on Hannah Durkin's complete refusal to acknowledge reparations. They'll be saying that reparations should have been for those who were in slavery. Expect to see some Negroes get bold saying that. You're gonna have, and they're not gonna be coming from the political right. The white media knows what they got to do. They got to get some black folks who you would think would know better, get them to say, well, we got to minimize this, don't you know? And they'll be doing it under the guise of a black-brown alliance. Alexandria Cortez, she was talking about reparations beginning in the 1930s. Well, there were a lot of people. It's about white supremacy, you see. It's about racism, you see. White power knows what they're doing. It's about maintaining the economic gap, you see. They don't mind you calling out white supremacy or white power or racism as long as you're not doing anything that's going to change it. You can take rhetorical pot shots at them all day long. You can get in a couple of verbal digs all day long. But if you're not talking about fundamentally balancing the economic scales, then you ain't hitting on nothing. You're not changing anything. And white power is only concerned with what's going to change its position in the world. These white media pieces that are going to be calling themselves trying to otherwise highlight black women, that's them talking to black women, and they hope that they're talking to black women. They want black women to see that, and it's, hey, we're gonna dangle this black woman in front of you, black females, and you're gonna start listening to us again, right? You're gonna start hearing, because we know that's all it takes, right? Maybe black women won't respond to the feminine overture the first time, but maybe they'll respond the 10th time or the 30th time. That's what the white media is banking on, because they're not going to be doing this just once. Some black females are going to see this and think, oh, finally they're recognizing black women. If your freaking ego takes over and your pathetic, emaciated psychology just takes over, where you think to yourself that I don't mind if my enemy is trying to set me up for the mother of all whammies, as long as they're acknowledging me. I just want them to acknowledge me. If you sit around waiting for your enemy to acknowledge you, then that makes you part of the problem. Slavery didn't happen just to black men or just to black women. It happened to us all. There should be neither light nor air between us on that fact. You want to know why it was that slavery was eventually brought to an end? Is because you had women like Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth who told those white suffragists of the 19th century to kick rocks. Those white suffragists showed up as the tools of white supremacy, the agents of white supremacy in the 19th century, trying to figure out, how do we get black women off of this thing? But Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth and others remembered, hey, who was it who gave birth to and raised that wicked white man who's running white supremacy? Oh, it was these white women over here who did it. See, Harriet Tubman wasn't looking for a place sitting at the table with some white women so she could feel like she was an honorary white woman. Same thing for Sojourner Truth. In the 19th century, black women had their heads on straight as a group. And no amount of white women showing up with their fake camaraderie was going to change that. They understood what it was and what it's got to be. They understood when white supremacy was trying to figure out how to divide and conquer. You see, there was no humiliation. There was no degradation that black women suffered that black men did not also suffer as well. If you want to try to pull well, black women were raped on the plantations. Well, black men were castrated and lynched a hell of a lot more. One was a violation, the other was a violation, a mutilation, and fatal. White people know that black folks suffer from ego starvation, and we love having our fragile, emaciated egos catered to by white daddy and white mommy. They're testing us with stuff like this. They want to see if we've lost our appetite for white approval yet. Because they know that that's what at the core of Willie Lynch and the post-traumatic slave disorder and all the rest of these psychological hang-ups and disturbances that we have is the fact that at the end of the day, we still want white mommy and white daddy to pat us on the head because we've been conditioned to look to them for all things. And they want to see, they're testing, has the psychological conditioning broken? Well, with enough of us, it has. And if trying to get a pat on the back or get your ego diddled by white power, if that's what you're looking for, then you ain't with me, and you won't be allowed to be with me. This hit piece was meant to push a lot of buttons, and we better be aware of the buttons that they're trying to push. We better call out their tactics and the people using them. Neither USA Today nor this white woman wrote this article in order to do us any favors. They're trying to use our ancestors' stories, the stories of the black folks who came out of those plantations, the black folks who walked off those plantations, or in the case of Redoshi, who lingered on there for a few years before finally Massa told her to get lost. Let's just be honest about it. They're trying to use the stories of the slaves themselves and to twist those tales of tragedy and get them to fit the white supremacist agenda, using the stories of the slaves themselves. And it is no coincidence or an accident that they chose this woman to use as their pawn. This entire so-called article was only written because this white woman in England wrote a research paper. That's it. That's the only reason that USA Today put out this feculent bit of nonsense. Because some white woman in England wrote a research paper about it. Not because she wrote a book, by the way. She didn't even have the decency to write a book. All she did was she wrote a research paper. She didn't make a documentary about Redoshi. She just simply wrote a research paper. So the only reason that this article exists is to amplify some white woman's research paper. Say, how many research papers written by black scholars highlighting reparations has USA Today seen fit to use as an article? How many black scholars who have written articles demanding reparations has USA Today decided justified an article? Did they look at anything that has been done or said online and say, well, you know what these people are doing, this whole movement that they got, this justifies an article? No, they haven't. So you got a group of black folks, young black folks, who crushed a major party would-be candidate, Kamala Harris, crushed her. And the white media is not looking and going, that certainly justifies an article. They're trying to avoid this black empowerment movement like the plague. Because it scares them. It should. This is a harbinger that could very well bring about the very end of white power, along with the system of white giveaways, goodies, and guarantees that undergirds white power. That's the glue holding this house of thieves together. This pack of thieves are held together by their mutual theft pact. We're going to work together to steal, rob, rape, and pillage as much as we can, and then stick together to protect each other from any sort of punishment or from any sort of leveling of the playing field. Now, USA Today could have very easily have done a piece on Sylvester McGee, but they didn't. This story is about trying to invent some sort of imaginary window for reparations claims and to declare that window closed. In other words, the same old white fiat. I'm white and I say so. We're white and we're saying that Redoshi was the last person who was affected by slavery. So as far as we're concerned, she's the last person who we should be talking about. Anything other than that, that just isn't valid. It's also meant as a means to muddy the waters on the discussion. It's so obvious they might as well have had Bernie Sanders write this piece and ask, well, what about black people born outside of the U.S.? Why, Redoshi was born she was born in Benin. She was born in West Africa, so if she was alive today, would she get reparations too? Would her descendants get reparations? By the way, in answer to the white media's pathetic attempted dodge, the answer to a question like that would be yes and yes. It doesn't matter where Redoshi was born. What mattered was she went through the hell of slavery in the United States. Redoshi went through the killing fields of the United States. Redoshi did not go through slavery in the Caribbean. She didn't go through slavery in Haiti. She didn't go through slavery in Brazil or Africa or anywhere else. She did not come to the United States after slavery was over. She was brought here like all the other foundational black Americans were. Redoshi and her descendants are without doubt owed the debt of this country because she was one of the ones who suffered during it. There's no confusion at all about who reparations applies to and whom it doesn't apply to. Now, the white media desperately wants to manufacture some sort of confusion because, as Upton Sinclair once said, it is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it. Well, to make it more appropriate to white power, it is very difficult to get a white man to understand something when his power, privilege, and perks depend upon his not understanding it. That's what's going on here. So yeah, they're going to play dumb, and you're going to have some black folks who will play dumb right along with them, but we won't be any of them. White power and their non-white flunkies, they stand to lose a lot more than a mere salary as black empowerment goes on the march. They stand to lose the entire artificial position over us that they've been enjoying for so long. The white supremacists, their non-white flunkies, they understand that everything that's been going on here is a total fraud, but they also know that that fraud has given them every crumb of their daily bread. So of course they're going to be defending it. White supremacy is a lie, and you're going to have all these clowns, many of them black, who will be telling nothing but lies to defend it. In a sense, they are genuinely confused, or rather indecisive. They understand precisely the threat that we pose, and they don't know whether to spit or go blind. That's the only confusion going on here. All this talk about who's owed reparations or how would it be structured, that's just them playing stupid. But when it comes to the fact that they're genuinely scared, yeah, and they don't know what to do about it, yeah, that they're not making up. That confusion really is true. That confusion is genuine. About the only relevant point in this propaganda piece was that Redoshi was the slave of a man named Washington Smith, and this guy apparently owned a plantation in Dallas County, Alabama. And he was also a founder of the Bank of Selma. Now, that's something that I thought was actually salient in the article, something that actually was intelligent. We need to identify the countless corporations who got their seed money from the slave trade, particularly the banks, without whom both the railroads and the telegraph lines would never have happened. The Industrial Revolution began in Britain in the mid-18th century. That's about the 1750s, 25 years before the Declaration of Independence. But the only reason that Britain had the economic wherewithal to industrialize was because of the unprecedented economic power given to them by their colonies in America, which was the sole result of one factor and one factor alone: 150 years of free black slave labor that Britain was eating off of for free. The white media, and that includes their so-called historians, who I think we can all agree are mostly paid liars, they've spent centuries trying to indoctrinate people about white history, making it sound as if all these slave owners and thieves and mass murderers and rapists and warmongers, they were nothing but a bunch of honest, hard-working men who had some personality flaws, but nothing more serious than that. Why, they were a bunch of hard-working white folks who caught some lucky breaks that were the result of their own hard work dented industry. Well, that's not true at the individual level, and it damn sure ain't true at the group level. Britain's prosperity in the 18th century, that was the sole result of tremendous amounts of hard work, but it wasn't hard work that white folks were doing. It was the hard work of black people, our people. So yeah, out of an entire BS-laden article about the only intelligent thing, and I'm kind of surprised that this got past the censors at USA Today. The only intelligent thing that was in the entire article was that Ridoshi's slave owner used the money that he got from her labor to go ahead and found his own bank. That means that him and his descendants and all of the white people, because they damn sure weren't making loans to black folks, all of the white people who went to the Bank of Selma and got money out of that thing and started their own businesses, they were benefiting from slave labor. Along with all these other banks and insurance companies that were getting caked off because of foundational black Americans being deprived of our due. So I want you to keep that in mind. White power, the white media is going to be turning up the heat. They're going to be trying to find a way to, what's the angle going to be that we're going to use to try to insinuate ourselves into this discussion? First, they have to be able to derange the discussion, redefine the discussion, change the terms of the discussion. And what that means is, instead of talking about reparations, instead we're going to be talking about Ridoshi. And, we won't spend too much time about what she was doing on the plantation after slavery ended. We're not going to spend too much time dwelling on that. And we're not going to be talking about old Washington Smith and the Bank of Selma and how much money he and his descendants got out of it. We won't be talking about that much either. No, instead what it's going to be about is it's going to be about talking about the black female survivors of the transatlantic slave trade and American slavery in general, and American segregation all the way to the present. It's going to be about that. We're going to see if we can use the stories of the slaves themselves, because we see that you guys have caught on to some of our tricks and we ain't going to be able to get away with some of this stuff we've been doing. So we're going to try some new tack now. We're going to try. We know, of course, that why you would never, ever denounce one of the survivors of the plantations. Why you would never do that. You would never say that there's something wrong or that their memory's being misused. At least we don't think you would. So we're going to try it and see what the response is. Well, what the response is that it's a brand new day. What the response is, if you're talking about slavery without talking about reparations, then what you are doing is you are committing historical and moral blasphemy. You profane and disrespect not merely the memory of Ridoshi, but of all of the people who were imprisoned on the plantations, who were violated and who were destroyed and degraded over the course of 250 plus years, and their survivors all the way to the present. You are no different and no better than Washington Smith nor any other slave owner. That's what the response is. We see what you're doing, white media. We see you, and we are not fooled.